Hello there. Welcome home. Chill, relax. Take a moment, grab yourself a lovely coffee or tea. This is empty, by the way. And let's talk about self-study. So, self-study, right? Self-study is something everybody does, be it a chair or a student. But self-study is a little bit different for a chair, because your main goal is not so much to simply know everything, but much rather to create a cohesive class that runs from beginning to finish and is able to answer all the learning goals. So, how do you do this? How do you study differently than your peers? Well, unfortunately, I have bad news for you. Much like everybody else, you need to know the material. And this video is not really going to teach you how to know the material. Instead, what we are going to teach you is how to create a solid and well thought out lesson plan. So, let's see how to do that. A lesson plan. What is a lesson plan? A lesson plan is essentially a series of moves and questions that the chair or whoever runs a classroom asks to the rest of the students in order to create a cohesive conversation that goes from the first learning goal to the last one. Now, speaking of learning goals, half of the job is already done for you. Since in pre-discussion you have already organized your learning goals in a logical way, you already have the skeleton of a lesson plan that you can go through. But simply asking a learning goal might not create the most engaging conversation or might not go in depth to all the things that can be said about that learning goal. So here, we're going to see how we can flesh this out. Oof, it's gotten a bit cold in here. Much better. All right, so now that we have space to work with, let's work with your learning goals and flesh them out as we talked about. So, let's work together. Find a learning goal. I think I'll pick this one. What was the Industrial Revolution? It's a bit big and wide and a little vague. You know, it happens. Sometimes you don't make great learning goals. But that's why we're here, to make those not so great learning goals good building blocks for a lesson plan. Now, do you have yours? Pick a vague one or one that you find a bit complicated or hard. Good. Now put it aside. Find the biggest text you have to read. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but now we're going to have to do some reading. So pause this video and start reading. While you're reading, the most important thing I want you to do, other than try to understand the text, is take notes. Take as many notes as you can. A few pages will be nice. Next to the note, annotate the page of where you found that note. Good? All right, I'll see you in a moment. Oh, you're done? Good. Are you really done? Like the whole thing? Yeah, from introduction to conclusion. Okay, I believe you. So, if you're actually done, then you should have quite a few notes next to you. So, what do you do with those notes? Take all your learning goals, especially let's focus on the one that we picked, and put them in a paper or maybe a Word document. And then start putting your notes under the learning goal that you feel they correspond to. Your notes would usually be an interesting sentence you read, or a question that you have, or something that clearly relates as an answer to one of the learning goals that you had. All right, take a moment, do this, and then let's come back. All right. So by now, you should have an assortment of learning goals, but each of them has quite a few notes underneath them. Now, let's focus on the learning goal that you initially wanted to work with. For me, again, the Industrial Revolution. So let's find a note that I wrote down that fits under what was the Industrial Revolution. Let me see here. This one. So my note is the Industrial Revolution happened in 3 phases. I found this in page 21. Good. So you ask, okay, I have it underneath it. What do? Do I simply ask in class what was the Industrial Revolution? I hope somebody says it happened in 3 phases. This can work, but it puts a lot of trust that people know exactly what you want to say, because what is the Industrial Revolution could be many other things. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take the bigger question of the learning goal and create smaller questions to guide us through it. So let's get back to our note. The Industrial Revolution happened in 3 phases. This is an answer. How then can you make this answer into a question? Maybe ask, hey guys, I read that the Industrial Revolution happened in 3 phases. Do we know what they are? When do they start? When do they finish? What characterizes them? Or something even more simple. Hey guys, did the Industrial Revolution happen all in one go? Or was it broken up in some way? Now you see how you've made your one note into 2 different questions that you can both ask under the umbrella of the wider question of what was the Industrial Revolution. You should do this with all your notes, or at least with quite a few of them, so that by the end you are left not with answers under your learning goals, but rather questions under your learning goals. Because remember, your job is to not give answers, is to ask questions to the class, and they are supposed to give you the answers. All right, so now you should have your main learning goals, your big questions, and then quite a few smaller questions underneath them. In theory, we are done. So take your learning goals, put them in the logical order that they were, write the questions under them, and congratulations, you have a lesson plan. So your first question, what is the Industrial Revolution? You have 5 or 6 questions underneath it to ask the classroom to go deeper and actually analyze all the aspects of the wider question of what was the Industrial Revolution, right? Yet, take a moment and look, now that you have all this information, all those questions, if there's a cohesive narrative from the first learning goal to the last one, if there's a red thread, so to say. If not, maybe reorganize them a little bit. Again, remember, you are new. You don't make amazing learning goals the first time, and that is completely okay. And since you're the chair, you have always the option to fix that stuff, reorganize it. If you like the order of things, then great. You might have a few too many questions under your bigger learning goals, but that's okay. You can judge in classroom if you want to ask all of them. If you already want to curate them, feel free, cut a few away. Maybe have 5 or 6 under each of them instead of 20. But this is completely up to you. Again, decisions, right? You make the decisions that you want to make. So now, this is your lesson plan. You can go into class, ask the first learning goal, what was the Industrial Revolution? And immediately ask, before we start asking general questions, let's ask something specific about this. How many phases were there? Or, I heard there were 3 phases. How did they happen? The students will start answering, hopefully. If they do, just put a little check that the question has been answered. And a lot of the times, the conversation will pick up itself. So you don't have to actually ask all the questions. All you have to keep in mind is if the questions are being answered. But this also gives you the ability to know that when there's a silence, when they're stuck, you can see which questions have not been answered and go back to them and ask a second question. Okay, we talked about the phases, but what technological advancements characterize each of them? There we go. We're moving the conversation. When you run out of questions, it's a pretty good indicator that the learning goal itself has been answered. Congratulations, you've done your first learning goal. Move down and you will have a proper lesson plan where all the learning goals are being addressed. Now, this is the core body of a lesson plan. But I want to teach you a couple more things to make your classes maybe a little bit more interesting and dynamic. Feel free to use them or ignore them, but hear them. They might be interesting. All right, so by now you have the main body of your lesson plan. Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce some ways for you to have an easier time starting your classroom. Because, sometimes people are a bit tired, afraid, bored, shy. So it's nice to have something to get the ball rolling when a class is happening. Now, we're going to talk about 3 methods, but feel free to use some other methods if you can think of some. If you can ask somebody that knows more, maybe a student of a second or third year, or even, use an AI. Say, hey, how can I introduce a class on the Industrial Revolution in a fun and interesting way? And maybe it'll give you some good ideas. Now let's work with the ideas that we have seen to work. And more importantly, let's talk about why you would pick each of them instead of simply giving you a list. So the first way that you can start a classroom is with a Kahoot or a quiz. Get a little competition in there, not too much though. But most importantly, why you would want to do this is, apart from getting the ball rolling and getting people a bit more engaged with a little bit of a game, it is to get a lot of information that is factual and doesn't have much of interpretation out of the way. Let's go back to the Industrial Revolution idea. If I make a Kahoot question and say, in the first phase of the Industrial Revolution, what was the most important invention? And I give 4 options. I have already answered some basic questions that don't have much of analysis to be done. 1, that there are phases of the revolution, and there's the first one. And 2, that it is characterized by a specific invention, that being the steam engine. Another option is using videos at the start of the class. Try to not make it too long. 5 to 10 minutes would be something appropriate. A video is nice because it's an easier audiovisual experience that students can see and engage with, and it kind of eases them into the classroom. But also videos can be used to present new ideas or complicated ideas that found in the text in a more simple way. Remember, having new ideas that might be critical or different from the text is something quite valuable and important. Texts are not perfect. They have biases, they have vested interests, and they might have differing opinions. An easy example would be the text that you all read in your introduction days, Newsbound. The text spoke about the importance of humanities and how a world without humanities would be a dark place. But we should also consider that Nussbaum is a professor in humanities. She gets paid to teach humanities. Of course, he has an interest in humanities being an important part of society. Somebody that maybe is more into hard sciences could argue that humanities don't have that much value. It is up to you to make your decisions on that, but I'm just trying to show you that introducing information, and maybe not in text form because your fellow students didn't have the time to read them, but in a video form, might be an interesting start to a classroom. Finally, another way that you can start your class is by breaking the class into smaller rooms. Remember, you might have even done this in your pre-discussion. Why would you do this? Well, quite similar reasons. Having the class broken into smaller rooms at the start allows students to maybe talk in a smaller setting, that they are less afraid, that they don't feel the pressure of the entire class looking at them. It also allows them to see the level of prep that other students have had. And what they will quickly realize is that nobody has prepped perfectly. Well, some of you might have, good on you, but we don't expect you to be perfectly prepared. By doing this, you give them the opportunity to relax a little bit, but also talk about questions before they come to the main group. And thus, when the questions are asked in the main group, they already have some ideas floating in their head that they can bring to the big discussion. Speaking of talking about questions, it's important to think that when you break people into smaller groups, you shouldn't just tell them, hey, talk about the questions, but instead say, hey, we have 6 questions. Maybe let's break into 3 groups, and the first group takes question 1 and 2, the second group takes question 3 and 4, and the third group takes question 5 and 6. Or any other division that you find appropriate. Maybe you want to mix them up a little bit so they get more complex and more easy questions. Or maybe you want to ask them to think about something else, or think about the specific text specifically instead of the questions. It's completely up to you. Again, the decisions are yours to make, but give them a goal. Don't just tell them speak, because a lot of the times if you just ask them to speak, they will all speak about the first question, and then when we come back, we'll only have information about the first question. All right. So, by now, we should have 2 things. Some pretty good ideas about how to start our lesson, and a solid lesson plan. Pick one of the 3 ideas I gave you, or maybe one you thought about, or even something you found online, and put it at the top of your lesson plan. Also, don't panic if you don't like any of them or you feel it doesn't fit. Scrap it. It's okay to run a class the way that you feel comfortable running your class. But what is the most important thing is that after this video, you have come out with a solid plan and you know what you're doing. You've made your decisions and you're going to stick with them. So now the only thing that's left for you is to actually apply them. And for this to happen, we're going to see you in the next video. We're going to talk to you about how to run a post discussion.